Frank, are we about ready?
Yes, we'll stop sharing so you can speak to the group.
Okay, that's great. Well, now I have to figure out, I have to make sure my screen is right. Hey, great. So welcome everyone to the 28th annual Martin Luther King Faculty Staff in Service. This year's theme is Let Freedom Ring. We actually got that theme, or that theme was inspired by the Office of Multicultural Student Services, who was bringing in, I want to make sure I get the name right, Joan Trumpeller Mulholland, who is a civil rights icon, someone who participated in the freedom rides, and who will on January the 17th, this date, from 4 to 6, be giving a presentation for OMSS. So that inspired us to use the theme, Let Freedom Ring. We'll start this with a short video from a group, I think they're called the Freedom Singers, and they are doing a song called Woke Up This Morning. Let me get make sure I close out all these different things. They're doing a song called Woke Up This Morning, which is a reboot of an old gospel song called Woke Up This Morning with My Mind Stayed on Jesus. And it was redone by Robert Westby while he was in a Mississippi prison doing the freedom rides. So we'll start with that song. Thank you, Franklin.
I woke up this morning with my mind was set on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, Lord, set on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind set on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. I'm walking and talking with my mind set on freedom. I'm walking and talking with my mind, Lord, set on freedom. I'm walking and talking with my mind set on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Walk, 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 talk, talk, you gotta 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 talk, 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 you gotta talk, 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 cause it ain't no harm to keep your mind set on freedom. It ain't no harm to keep your mind, Lord, set on freedom. It ain't no harm to keep your mind set on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Well, thank you for that. And, you know, I know it's going to be hard because we're so used with this Zoom to multitasking and, you know, answering our emails and writing reports and doing all of that. And, you know, but there's few times in the university's calendar where we just come together and try to create a space where we can let that stuff go for a while. So as much as is possible for you, even if you have to leave and come back, but as much as is possible, try to create a space where you can be here and be present with us as we take these next couple hours to reflect on some of Dr. King and his work and what freedom means. We will have another short video, this one from the Freedom Riders, The reason we decided to include this is because, quite frankly, a lot of people don't have a good understanding what the Freedom Rides were. And so we thought we'd just do like a little 2-3 minute video to kind of catch people up to speed. Go ahead, Frank.
African Americans, since the end of slavery, have been treated in much of the country as a despised minority. They are forced to eat and use bathrooms separately from whites. James Farmer is the founder of the Congress of Racial Equality, known as CORE.
In order to understand how any Negro feels under segregation, you have to realize that from the time of infancy, he has it pounded into him that he's not as good as other people. There are things he cannot do. Don't do this, you can't do this, you can't do the other. It builds into a man a feeling of inferiority, a feeling of frustration, a feeling of resentment.
James Farmer and CORE want Kennedy to understand that segregation stains America's image around the world. CORE wants to test the Supreme Court ruling, long ignored in the South, that bans segregation in interstate travel. The plan is for black and white volunteers to ride together on buses, journeys that CORE calls Freedom Rides. The riders commit themselves to nonviolence,
I want you to think it over very carefully, and if you feel
believing that
you
challenging
are prepared
segregation
to make the
peacefully
sacrifice,
will force the authorities to act.
we would be very happy to have you embark upon this dangerous, worthwhile, significant mission.
CORE prepares the riders for the racial hatred they can expect.
Hey, you, nigga. You hear what that man said? You hear what that man said? You get back there. Get back there. Get back, get back, get back.
Excuse me. Hey. Come on.
Come on, get him back.
On May 4th, 1961, James Farmer leads 13 people, black and white, onto buses in Washington, D.C., bound for New Orleans. Ten days later, the bus enters Alabama, home to the largest KKK organization in America. They know the riders are coming. In Anniston, the Klan surrounds the bus, slashing its tires. Photographer Joe Postiglione captures these images. The crippled Greyhound tries to escape, but a few miles out of town, the Klan surrounds and firebombs it, with the riders still inside. The Freedom Riders do escape the bus, only to be beaten by the Klan. Joe's photos bring the Freedom Rides to international attention.
Thank you for that. And our first reader is Michelle Rasmussen. And let's give Franklin a hand, by the way, for putting this all together. I mean, it's a lot easier when we can just meet over in University Center and I call someone's name and point at them and they walk up front. This is a lot more complicated.
It's all good.
So
I
thank
thank
you.
everybody for submitting the videos. That was really, really helpful. So
All right.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Rasmussen, and today I will be reading Killing Sisyphus by Candida Law. I could hear the click as the water bug fell back against the porcelain sink. Following each failure, he mustered his strength and launched a new ascent. What he lacked in smarts, he seemed to make up in determination. Because I lay on a steel plank with holes the size of $50 perforating it, holes my pelvic bones gravitated into whenever I tried lying on my side or my stomach, I was awake to listen to the fat brown insect. Having reassured myself that he couldn't escape the sink, I sank back onto the cold metal bunk and tried to sleep. Our mattresses had been seized that afternoon. About as thick as a magazine, they had been taken in the ongoing power struggle between the captain, overseer of the maximum security unit at Parchman Farm, Mississippi State Penitentiary, and us, the Freedom Riders. Mississippi sought to intimidate us by throwing us into 6x9 concrete cells where we languished with nothing but a Bible, a toothbrush, and one stubby pencil. Only the toothbrush wasn't shared with the roughly 30 other women Freedom Riders. That afternoon, the captain had stood before us with his minions, black trustees who handed out mops and pails so we could swab out our cells. We sang a song we knew would irritate him. Paul and Silas were bound in jail, had no money for to go their bail. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on. He ordered us to shut up, and perhaps out of shock, we did. The captain, a portly man with a round face, stopped directly in front of my cell. It may be that if his eyes had not connected with mine, and if I hadn't seen how he gloated over his pitiful victory, I would have remained silent. But he was King Midas, rubbing his paws together over another gold coin added to his stash. There are music lovers who would cross the street to avoid hearing me croak out a song, but I saw that I had no choice. I looked the captain in the eye and bellowed, "We're gonna fight both black and white. We're gonna fight for civil rights. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on." I didn't get past "we're gonna fight for civil rights" before the other Freedom Riders drowned me out. The trustees began dragging our mattresses from the cells. We sung louder. Now, after a day of glory, I was enduring the sleeplessness of profound discomfort. The lights glared down as they perennially did, and the air conditioner iced the steel. With no blanket and no mattress, I shivered, trying not to feel sorry for myself. I knew I wasn't suffering as much as the men in the punishment cells behind us. I knew this because a Freedom Rider had a conversation with one of those men, talking through the vent above the toilet. He told her that he and his fellow inmates only wore shorts, slept on cold steel, and got one meal daily, a slice of bread and a cup of water. The Freedom Rider, a clever young woman, managed to rig up a pulley by which she could transport our bread to the starving men. Feeling virtuous, cornbread and biscuits were about the only edible food we got. We donated to the cause. She wrapped the bread in netting from a sanitary napkin, tied it up with string pulled from her mattress, and swung it up under the vent. Sisyphus, as I had named the bug, kept on striving. Click, click, click. I sat up. Somewhere, water was running. Night normally brought quiet, but now something was happening. I heard the other Freedom Riders murmuring. We were all waiting to learn the meaning of that running water. Then we heard it. Thud, scream, thud, scream. It went on as we sat helpless on the other side of a prison wall. I pulled on my hair to distract myself. Some of the women moaned. At last, the water ceased running. A cell door slammed. We must have uttered a collective sigh before hearing our own cell block gate open. "Man coming!" the matron shouted. There he was, his trustees fingering brass knuckles and smirking. He wore a starched uniform and a happy smile. From behind his back, the captain drew a small battered bag of crumbs. Then he signaled the trustees. Our cell doors opened and the men began dragging our mattresses back in. With a tip of a non-existent hat, the captain saluted us. "Good night, y'all." I turned to the sink, scooped out Sisyphus, and slammed the Bible down on him. Then I slid down the wall, pulled my knees up, and hugged them. Down the cell block, I could hear the sound of weeping.
Thank you. That was excellent. Our next reader is Danielle Gregory.
Joan Trumpauer Mulholland was a freedom rider and civil rights activist. She was also the first white member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. This piece, entitled Dialogue, is Jones' response to the question why she risked her life for the civil rights movement. Where have you been? To jail. What did you do? Nothing. Nothing but act like an American. Well, why did you do that? I thought you were a Southerner. I am. Yes. Then why? That's why. Because I'm a Southerner. Nothing more? I'm a Christian. That's what they all say, but for a different reason. I read the Declaration of Independence. You are strange. Yes, very strange, but not alone.
Thank you. And the next reading is from Sandy Alspach.
I want to thank David for giving me the opportunity to read this letter to you today as part of our celebration of the Freedom Rider movement. This was a letter to the editor printed in the St. Paul Pioneer Press, and it was written by the mother of Claire O'Connor, one of the Freedom Riders. The letter was posted on June 30th, 1961. To the editor, we hear a great deal today about our young people. As in all periods, we have our quota of delinquents, hot riders, drunken drivers, young gangsters. I read in the paper the other day about it, young GIs, not out of their teens, who cut a swath of murder across the nation. On the arm of one, the tattooed motto, I hate the world. We have another kind of young person today. And this kind too has existed in all times past. These are the clear-eyed youth with the realistic dreams. Realistic because they mean to do something, to make those dreams some realities. The kids with conviction and the courage to live up to them. I am proud that my daughter, Claire O'Connor, is with these practical dreamers, not the other group. Claire is in the Hinds County Jail in Jackson, Mississippi, sharing a 4-bunk cell with 11 or more other freedom riders from all parts of the nation, including the South. She went there facing possible violence and certain arrest because she believes that as long as full freedom and equality are denied to any portions of our citizenry, none of us is wholly free and equal. I agree with Claire. As a citizen of the United States of America, I consider it my right to be able to go into any public place, restaurant, or waiting room in the nation. My inability to do this is an infringement on my personal rights, which are supposed to be guaranteed by the Constitution. Suppose I wanted to take a Negro friend to lunch. Is there any restaurant in Mississippi where we could break bread together? Am I, let alone my friend, really free as long as these barriers exist? There are those who say that these young idealists should stay home and expend their energies in trying to clean up their own backyard. True, many inequities exist right here in the Twin Cities, but they will never be wholly eradicated as long as it's possible to point righteously to the South as proof of our own superiority. Let us strike at inequalities where they are most flagrant, because this is the weakest link in the chain. Raise the level of civilization in Mississippi, and our own will rise correspondingly. Again, there are those who argue that the objective of the Freedom Riders is worthy, but their methods wrong or ill-timed. Let us work legally, they say. Let us not go into another state and break their local laws. I will not argue that the primary lawbreaker is the state of Mississippi and other southern states, with their little local rules flaunting the greater law of the nation and Constitution. Everyone knows this. But there are times when laws must be broken. Laws like these exist to preserve injustice, to prevent progress. Underground Railway workers did not get hung up on the fine points of legalism. They saw that a job had to be done and they did it. Claire and her fellow freedom riders, in disregarding these illegal local regulations, are carrying on the finest tradition of Americanism. As for timing the effort, isn't 100 years enough of a cooling off period? We must realize, however, that the sacrifices of such young people as my daughter will not in themselves affect the needed changes. Their value exists in their dramatization of the issues. They are bringing these problems to the attention of the entire nation in the most effective way of which they are capable. The changes will come about only when their action sets off the necessary reaction, which all of us here and all freedom-loving people everywhere wake up to the seriousness of the situation and demand that the federal government do something about it. We must begin to realize that as long as a single state with impunity defies the law of the nation, to that extent, law and order are everywhere threatened. I wish to appeal to everyone to write to their senators and congressmen, to the president, and to Attorney General Robert Kennedy, asking that they use every means at their command to see that the sacrifices of the freedom riders will not have been in vain. St. Paul, Minnesota, Justine O'Connor.
Thank you. That was very good. 60 years later, looking around, I used to say that the young people were our best chance. Now I believe they're our only chance. And all right, so let's keep it moving, David. Our next reader is Kaylee Burke.
Hello, everyone. I would like to share with you today a speech written and delivered by Cesar E. Chavez in April 1978, entitled, "He Showed Us the Way." In honoring Martin Luther King Jr.'s memory, we also acknowledge nonviolence as a truly powerful weapon to achieve equality and liberation. In fact, the only weapon that Christians who struggle for social change can claim as their own. Dr. King's entire life was an example of power that nonviolence brings to bear in the real world. It is an example that inspired much of the philosophy and strategy of the farm workers movement. This observation of Dr. King's death gives us the best possible opportunity to recall the principles with which our struggle has grown and matured. Our conviction is that human life is a very special possession given by God to man, and that no one has the right to take away for any reason or for any cause, however just it may be. We are also convinced that nonviolence is more powerful than violence. Nonviolence supports you if you have a just and moral cause. Nonviolence provides the opportunity to stay on the offensive, and that is of crucial importance to win any contest. If we resort to violence, then one of two things will happen. Either the violence will be escalated and there will be many injuries or perhaps deaths on both sides, or there will be total demoralization of the workers. Nonviolence has the exact opposite effect. If, for every violent act committed against us, we respond with nonviolence, we attract people's support. We can gather the support of millions who have a conscience and would rather see a nonviolent resolution to the problems. We are convinced that when people are faced with direct appeal from the poor struggling nonviolently against the odds, they will react positively. The American people and people everywhere still yearn for justice, and it is that yearning that we will appeal. But if we are committed to nonviolence only as a strategy or tactic, then if it fails, our only alternative is to turn to violence. So we must balance the strategy with a clear understanding of what we are doing. However important the struggle is, and however much misery, poverty, exploitation exists, we know that it cannot be more important than one human life. We work on the theory that men and women are truly concerned about people are nonviolent by nature. These people become violent when the deep concern they have for the people is frustrated, and when they are faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. We advocate militant nonviolence as the means for achieving justice for our people, but we are not blind to the feelings of frustration, impatience, and anger that seethe inside every farm worker. The burdens of generations of poverty and powerlessness lie heavy in the fields of America. If we fail, there are those who will see violence as a shortcut to change. It is precisely to overcome these frustrations that we have involved masses of people in their own struggle throughout the movement. Freedom is best experienced through the participation in self-determination, and free men and women indistinctively prefer democratic change to any other means. Thus, demonstrations and marches, strikes and boycotts are not only weapons against the growers, but our way of avoiding the senseless violence that brings no honor to any class or community. The boycott, as Gandhi taught, is most nearly perfect instrument of nonviolent change, allowing masses of people to participate actively in a cause. When victory comes through violence, it is a victory with strings attached. If we beat the growers at the expense of violence, victory would come at the expense of injury and perhaps death. Such a thing would have a tremendous impact on us. We would lose regard for human beings. Then the struggle would become a mechanical thing. When you lose your sense of life and justice, you lose your strength. The greater oppression, the more leverage nonviolence holds. Violence does not work in the long run, and if it is temporarily successful, it replaces one violent form of power with another just as violent. People suffer from violence. Examine history. Who gets killed in the case of a violent revolution? The poor, the workers. The people of the land are the ones who give their bodies and don't really gain much for it. We believe it is too big a price to pay for not getting anything. Those who ensure violence exploit people. To call men to arms with many promises, to ask them to give up their lives for a cause and not produce for them afterwards, is the most vicious type of oppression. We know that most likely we are not going to do anything else for the rest of our lives except build on our union. For us, there is nowhere else to go. Although we would like to see victory come soon, we are willing to wait. In this sense, time is our ally. We learned many years ago that the rich may have money, but the poor have time. It has been our experience that few men or women ever have the opportunity to know true satisfaction that comes with giving one's life totally to nonviolent struggle for justice. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of these unique servants, and from him we've learned many lessons that have guided us. For these lessons and for these sacrifices for the poor and the oppressed, Dr. King's memory will be cherished in the hearts of many farm workers forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And now we have a video on Dr. King and the challenges he faced.
Most of us live, eat, and die, and the world takes no notice. But Martin Luther King Jr., a Black preacher from Alabama, changed his world and ours. We have always been a nation divided by race, and those divisions are again amplified. The time is right to pause and reflect on his journey. J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI during King's lifetime, would be disappointed that there is a national holiday in King's honor. The FBI began monitoring King in December 1955 after his involvement with the Montgomery bus boycott. Throughout the 1960s, agents bugged his home, his office, and his hotel rooms. Hoover believed that King was the most dangerous Black man in America and sought to discredit him as a hypocritical, egomaniacal subversive who hated America. In 1964, the FBI director called King the most notorious liar in the country. Hoover was himself a gifted and talented liar, fantastic even, so it is hard to accept his assessment of King. Hoover was hardly the only one, in the parlance of my youth, to call King out of his name. Today we understand that the war in Vietnam was an unholy war, but when King condemned it, he was branded a communist traitor. Insulting descriptions of King in newspapers were many and varied: radical, extremist, criminal, rabble-rouser, troublemonger, fraud, charlatan, and so-called preacher. White segregationists sank even lower, labeling him Martin Lucifer King and Martin Luther Coon.
We've had in our area here outside agitation groups of all levels. We've had Martin Luther King.
Young black activists, frustrated with King's non-violence approach, called him an Uncle Tom. King was blamed for race riots, blamed for black children going to jail, blamed for the bombing that killed the 4 girls in a Birmingham church, even blamed for his own death. Long before he was murdered, his character was assassinated. Words hurt, so do fists. In 1962, during a Southern Christian Leadership Conference meeting, Roy James, a white man, left the audience, leaped onto the stage, and punched King in the face, hit him hard. King dropped his hands and stood there, allowing the assailant to strike him again. When his associates came forward, King said, "Don't touch him. We have to pray for him." King understood that forgiveness is not weakness. In 1965, James George Robinson, a white states writer, attacked King for trying to register at the Hotel Albert, a formerly whites-only business in Selma, Alabama. He punched King several times, and before black onlookers intervened, kicked him in the groin. King refused to press charges, stating that he had sympathy for Robinson. 2 months later, Robinson was arrested for beating a photographer. In August 1966, King led civil rights demonstrators on a march for fair housing in Chicago. They were met by white youths, goaded and hyped by the rants of Nazis and Klansmen. George Lincoln Rockwell, a self-styled Nazi Führer, told the teenagers to get guns to fight niggas. The youth shouted, "We want white power," and killed the niggas. At least 30 people were injured, some by a hail of bricks, stones, and bottles. A knife was thrown at King. He was knocked to the ground by a rock or brick. King later told reporters, "I have never seen such hate, not in Mississippi or Alabama, as I see here in Chicago."
I've been in many demonstrations all across the South, but I can say that I have never seen, even in Mississippi and Alabama, mobs as hostile and as hate-filled as I've seen here in Chicago.
We all die. Some of us are murdered. In retrospect, it seems almost inevitable that someone would kill King. On January the 30th, 1956, only weeks after the movement began, a white terrorist walked up to King's home and tossed an explosive on the porch. The bomb damaged the home but did not injure Coretta Scott King or Yolanda, their 7-month-old daughter. King was at a nearby church delivering a speech. He returned home to find it surrounded by black people thirsty for revenge. Standing a few feet from the site of the explosion, the young preacher channeled his inner angel. "I want you to love our enemies," he told the crowd. "Love them and let them know you love them." A year later, another person threw 12 sticks of dynamite wrapped around a tube onto the porch of King's home. The bomb did not explode. On September the 20th, 1958, King was in Bloomstein's department store in Harlem, signing copies of his book, Stride Toward Freedom. Isola Curry, a black woman, asked him if he was Martin Luther King Jr. He said yes. She plunged a steel letter opener into his chest. He was rushed to Harlem Hospital. He forgave her while the cold blade was still in his chest. In a painstaking operation, surgeons opened King's chest, exposing his aorta, and removed the weapon. If he had sneezed, he would have died. In February 1965, California police arrested Rodney Chesney and Ronald Bartell, two white men, for stealing 1,400 pounds of dynamite. They planned to use it to kill King when he delivered a speech at the Hollywood Temple, Israel. On June 10th, 1966, Chester White, a 67-year-old caretaker on a large farm, was brutally murdered by several Klansmen in Natchez, Mississippi. He was not a civil rights worker. He was not involved in the voting rights struggle. He was not a troublemaker. He was a black man, and the local Klan needed to kill a black man, any black man, to lure King to the city so they could kill him too. The scheme failed. It is fashionable to criticize King, but those who disparage him have warm breath in their lungs. He, however, is dead, assassinated by James Earl Ray, a fugitive from the Missouri State Penitentiary. I am reluctant to use the word assassinated. I know that when public figures are killed, it is expected that we say they were assassinated. But that word somehow has the ugliness of the act. He was murdered, cold-blooded murder. Do not say that he gave his life. His life was taken. For 12 years, King walked through and lived in the valley of the shadow of death. He defied death threats to lead marches in Chicago, Boston, and Los Angeles. He never saw his 40th birthday. He did not have the opportunity to outgrow his faults. I am thankful that he lived long enough to help the nation outgrow some of its faults. King delivered a speech in support of striking sanitation workers at Mason Temple in Memphis on the day before he was killed. It sounded like a eulogy for himself. And then I got to Memphis, and some began to say the threats or talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen
now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
April 4th, 1968 was an awful day in this country's past. King was murdered by a coward, safely shooting from a flophouse bathroom across the street from the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. It angers me that Ray used a rifle to gain a name, forever linking himself to King. While we are honoring King, white supremacists are wishing each other happy James Earl Ray Day. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama during the last days of Jim Crow. The governor was George Wallace, a white supremacist during a time when that label was a badge of honor in many places. I believed those days were spent.
Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
I was wrong. Awful days are here again. Politicians with a bloodlust for power feed racial hostilities, and anyone who checks them is called a racist. The rhetoric that I hear from our national leaders is reminiscent of Wallace's rants. Hate and fear, alas, remain primary organizing forces. Those of us committed to social justice must fight the good fight, run and not get weary, be people of conscience, social reformers who help the poor and disfavored while also speaking truth to power. We will sometimes be angry, but we must never be dragged so low as to hate others. If this country is to become that city upon a hill, it will be because those of us committed to a just society continue to agitate but refuse to hate.
Thank you for that, and great job on the video too, Franklin. The next reader is Casey Thompson.
Caged Bird by Maya Angelou. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream to the current ends and dips his wing in the orange sun's rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still. His tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sign trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom.
That was very good. Next, we'll have a talk and an introduction by Bobby Fleshman.
Today, I would like to talk to you about Dr. Howard Kirschenbaum. Dr. Kirschenbaum is an American educator, author, researcher, historic preservationist, and is a professor emeritus from the University of Rochester. Dr. Kirschenbaum also happens to be my cousin, and I call him Howie. And I'd like to share with you how he came to be deeply involved in the civil rights movement and what those activities meant to him. Many opportunities arose during Howie's college years that allowed him to be part of several life-changing experiences. Today, I would like to share some of those experiences with you, the most compelling of which will be a video produced in May of 2013 by Amara Public, a project of the Participatory Culture Foundation. The title of the video is The Civil Rights Movement, the 1964 Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. In part, the description states, and I quote, Howard Kirschenbaum was deeply involved in the civil rights movement. A college student in the 1960s, he was part of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, participated in the 1963 March on Washington, where Dr. Martin Luther King delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech. He was jailed on a freedom ride in Maryland. Dr. Kirschenbaum participated and was jailed in the Mississippi Summer Project of 1964, when three of his co-workers, Michael Schwerner, Andrew Goodman, and James Chaney, who had become icons of the civil rights movement, were murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. In an excerpt, and I read from the Civil Rights Movement archives, Howie states, Ron Ridenour and I were, I think, the first workers jailed after Goodman, Schwerner, and Chaney disappeared. In the prologue of Howie's memoir, entitled Coming of Age in the Baby Boom, a memoir of personal development, social action, education reform, and Adirondack preservation, Howie states, and I quote, from the sublime to the surreal, Moss Point, Mississippi, June 23rd, 1964. There we were, sitting in the back of a police car, wondering if we were going to be murdered. How did we get here? Howie's involvement in the civil rights movement was not limited to the 1960s. It has continued on to more recent involvement in the freedom movement. A New York Times article written in 2018 by Audra Birch entitled, A New Class of Voting Rights Activists Picks Up the Mantle in Mississippi, tells how Howie helped students at the University of Mississippi register to vote, the first time during the summer of 1964 when he was arrested and thrown in jail. Then the second time he traveled to Mississippi to help students register to vote was in 2018, more than half a century later, to support a new generation of voting rights activists. I quote from that article, in the quiet of a rainy morning, Dr. Kirschenbaum helped to register students on the campus of the University of Mississippi, and before long, he was in tears. Memories of the Freedom Summer 1964, the historic campaign to register African-American voters in Mississippi came rushing back. And I quote, I am witnessing this moment. They want to vote. They are able to vote. The connection between then and now was so palpable. This is about what we worked for all those years ago, again, to quote Dr. Kirschenbaum. In 2013, the Lake Placid News reprinted, with permission from columnist Frank Schatz of the Virginia Gazette, an interview where Howie stated, and again, I quote, like survivors of the Holocaust, it is important for those of us who participated in the civil rights movement to tell our story. I find young people are engaged and inspired by firsthand accounts of the freedom movement. It is one thing to read about it in a book, and is quite another when covered from a real person in your presence, making history come alive, end quote. I myself also remember many of those historic days and events. I have even more vivid memories of the anxious days our family shared while we waited to learn if Howie would come home alive from the various trips he took to be part of the civil rights movement. Now, I am very pleased to share with you Howie's video presentation, which serves to introduce a new generation of Americans to this important part of our history that describes the period of segregation and his own experiences in the movement. The Amara public video description goes on to state, and I quote, "Today, Dr. Kirschenbaum continues to share his own experiences with this period of segregation in US history with various audiences through a combination of historic photographs and compelling stories. He recreates a volatile time in American history and the struggle of hundreds of thousands of Americans, Black and white, young and old, North and South, to build a more just society," end quote. Thank you.
For many of us growing up in the 50s and 60s, as the civil rights movement began, much of it we saw on television as distant news. It didn't affect me as a young white high school student. When I was a sophomore in college in Baltimore, Maryland, which was a border state that still had segregation in many places, as I became aware of the discrimination that existed right around me, it seemed so unfair, so un-American. Injustice touched me personally. I believed in the American dream. I believed in Declaration of Independence, beautiful document. It just seemed unfair not to everybody have the benefits of it. I heard that there was a group forming to go to Mississippi the following summer, 1964. And Mississippi was the most segregated state in the country. When blacks in Mississippi are arrested, beaten, or even killed, no one seems to be paying attention. But when white students were, it got the attention of the country on Mississippi. So in the summer of 1964, I joined what became called the Mississippi Summer Project. The goal of the 1964 Mississippi Summer Project was, first and foremost, to increase the African American voter registration in Mississippi. It was a dangerous place for anyone who was opposing the status quo when it came to race relations. 2 days before I arrived in Mississippi, 3 of our colleagues, Michael Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman, were arrested, were released into the custody of the Ku Klux Klan, and were brutally murdered that night. 2 days later, I arrived, and when a colleague, another civil rights worker, and I were on our way to our office, we were arrested simply for walking down the street. 2 whites in a black neighborhood walking down the street. My coworker said to me, "You think they're going to kill us?" And I said, "Maybe, because that's what happened." I will never take the right to vote for granted, because I remember how the people I work with, the people I live with, risked their lives, and in some cases lost their lives, because the right to fully participate as an American citizen was that important to them. I remember on one occasion when we were having our Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party precinct meeting, a 35-year-old black man who was a sharecropper all his life. And when it came his turn, even though he could hardly read, he read off a piece of paper, "I place in nomination the name of Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey to be President and Vice President of the United States." There were tears in his eyes, because it was the first time in his life that he was getting to participate as a full, honored citizen in a democracy. And I can never forget that. When I think of the years, the half century between when I was involved with the civil rights movement and today, where we have Barack Obama as a president of the United States, it just underscores for me how slowly history moves and hopefully moves in a positive direction.
A production of the University of Rochester. Please visit us online and subscribe to our channel for more videos.
Well, that was very good. Next, we'll have Maggie Walcott.
Hi, I am Maggie Walcott, and this is a poem by Margaret Walker called For My People. For my people everywhere, singing their slave songs repeatedly, their dirges and their ditties and their blues and jubilees, praying their prayers nightly to an unknown God, bending their knees humbly to an unseen power. For my people lending their strength to the years, to the gone years and the now years and the maybe years, washing, ironing, cooking, scrubbing, sewing, mending, hoeing, plowing, digging, planting, pruning, patching, dragging along, never gaining, never reaping, never knowing, and never understanding. For my playmates in the clay and dust and sand of Alabama backyards, playing, baptizing, and preaching, and doctor and jail, and soldier and school, and mama and cooking, and playhouse and concert, and store and hair, and Miss Chumby and company. For the cramped, bewildered years we went to school, to learn, to know the reasons why, and the answers to, and the people who, and the places where, and the days when, in memory of the bitter hours when we discovered we were black and poor and small and different, and nobody cared, and nobody wondered, and nobody understood. For the boys and girls who grew in spite of these things, to be man and woman, to laugh and dance and sing and play and drink their wine and religion and success, to marry their playmates and bear children and then die of consumption and anemia and lynching. For my people thronging 47th Street in Chicago and Lenox Avenue in New York and Rampart Street in New Orleans, lost, disinherited, dispossessed, and happy people filling the cabarets and taverns in other people's pockets, and needing bread and shoes and milk and land and money and something all our own. For my people walking blindly, spreading joy, losing time, being lazy, sleeping when hungry, shouting when burdened, drinking when hopeless, tied and shackled and tangled among ourselves by the unseen creatures who tower over us omnisciently and laugh. For my people blundering and groping and floundering in the dark of churches and schools and clubs and societies, associations and councils and committees and conventions, distressed and disturbed and deceived and devoured by money-hungry, glory-craving leeches, preyed on by facile force of state and fad and novelty, by false prophet and holy believer. For my people standing, staring, trying to fathom a better way, from confusion, from hypocrisy and misunderstanding, trying to fashion a world that will hold all of the people, all the faces, all the Adams and Eves in their countless generations. Let a new earth rise. Let another world be born. Let a bloody peace be written in the sky. Let a second generation full of courage issue forth. Let a people loving freedom come to growth. Let a beauty full of healing and a strength of final clenching be the pulsing in our spirits and our blood. Let the martial songs be written. Let the dirges disappear. Let a race of men now rise and take control. Thank you.
Oh, that was beautiful. I think the next reader, Franklin, I'll make sure that I'm on right. Is it Fran? Okay, very good. Fran Rosen is the next reader.
Hi. My reading today is from an article that was published on the front page of the New York Times on May 26, 1961. I thought it was interesting because it shows some of the different perspectives and points of view that people had about the Freedom Riders. I think that they're pretty relevant for today as well. And it also gives a chance to see how Dr. King responded to some of the questions. The title of the article is Dr. King Refuses to End Bus Test, Rejects Pleas of Southern Liberals Who See Harm to Negroes Struggle. It's written by Claude Sitton, special to the New York Times, and the date line is Jackson, Mississippi, May 25th. Starts out, some liberal Southerners of both races join moderates and others today in asserting that Freedom Riders should be halted, but leaders of the movement pledged to continue and extend it into other states. The liberals said the Negro struggle for civil rights had possibly been set back by the roving bands of white and Negro students and adults challenging segregation on buses and in terminals. The demonstrations have led to 3 riots, the burning of a bus, and other racial violence in Alabama. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., principal spokesman for the factions in the movement, would not agree that the demonstrators had damaged the cause of his race or that their methods had been improper. He said that, despite a series of setbacks, the rioters would resume their efforts in full force next Monday or Tuesday, with the Deep South capital remaining as the chief target. He was reached by telephone at his Atlanta office. Among the liberal critics of the Freedom Riders was a white leader who has played a prominent role in the civil rights struggle. He and an equally well-known Negro declined use of their names because of the possibility of retaliation. It is one thing for persons to demand equal treatment in the towns where they live, or for persons to insist on it in the course of their normal travel, the white person said. This is something we can support and fight for. And in protests along these lines, as in the lunch counter and theater demonstrations, there have been plenty of Southerners who have been brought over because they recognize the justice of the protests. He continued, but for persons just to test and challenge is too much like baiting. They don't appeal to any underlying sympathy among Southerners. This becomes a dare, not a protest. I agree with the Attorney General that it is time for the freedom rides to end. I think Martin King is wrong to encourage others to come into Alabama and Mississippi. Martin is in a treacherous spot. He isn't getting constructive criticism from his friends, and nobody is wise enough to operate without the benefit of criticism. This leader contended that groups in New York, Washington, or Nashville had decided to do something. Once a particular movement begins, he went on, everybody who believes in civil rights tags along. King is swept along too, he said. The result is the kind of thing which happened in Alabama. Enough pressure is being exerted in the South today for civil rights, according to this man, out of the normal and justified demands of Negroes for equal treatment. We were winning this fight, he continued, and we were winning it right. We don't need people to manufacture issues. Nonviolence ought to mean more than non-retaliation. It ought to mean that you don't unnecessarily precipitate violence. The Negro leader agreed. Referring to the comments of the white liberal, this person said, he has said in beautiful language what has been running through my mind for the last 2 weeks. What concerns me is what may happen to the Southern Negroes after the Freedom Riders return to the safety of their homes outside the Deep South. Dr. King defended the demonstrators and their tactics. These are the pioneers who are making the way possible for people of all areas to ride buses unmolested by segregation, as well as to use the facilities of the bus terminals without being segregated, he said. He contended that this type of testing was necessary, continuing, I can conceive of no great social change or progress without some individuals who are willing to take the blows and who are temporarily misunderstood. In a democracy and a nation that is tied together by many strains as a federal union, can we call anyone an outsider? It is as much my obligation as one who lives in Atlanta to be concerned by what takes place in Mississippi as it is that of a person who lives in Mississippi.
Thank you. Our next reader is Lincoln Gibbs, who's going to read an essay about John Lewis. And of course, we recently lost John Lewis. And if you were paying attention to some of those photographs, a young John Lewis was in those photographs. I mean, he did get to live the length of his life, unlike Dr. King. So we'll turn now to Lincoln Gibbs.
Essay by civil rights leader John Lewis. Mr. Lewis, the civil rights leader who died on July 17th, wrote this essay shortly before his death to be published upon the day of his funeral. While my time here has now come to an end, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspire me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society. Millions of people motivated simply by human compassion lay down the burdens of division. Around the country and the world, you set aside race, class, age, language, and nationality to demand respect for human dignity. That is why I had to visit Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, though I was admitted to the hospital the following day. I just had to see and feel it for myself that after many years of silent witness, the truth is still marching on. Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, my Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. He was 14 when he was killed, and I was only 15 years old at the time. I will never ever forget the moment when it became so clear that he could easily have been me. In those days, fear constrained us like an imaginary prison, and troubling thoughts of potential brutality committed for no understandable reason were the bars. Though I was surrounded by two loving parents, plenty of brothers, sisters, and cousins, their love could not protect me from the unholy oppression waiting just outside that family circle. Unchecked, unrestrained violence and government-sanctioned terror had the power to turn a simple stroll to the store for some Skittles or an innocent morning jog down a lonesome country road into a nightmare. If we are to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in our hearts that could rob Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina of her brightest and best, shoot unwitting concertgoers in Las Vegas, and choke to death the hopes and dreams of a gifted violinist like Elijah McClain. Like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in, and then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on a radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said, we are all complicit when we tolerate injustice. He said it is not enough to say it will get better by and by. He said each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. You must also study and learn the lessons of history because humanity has been involved in the soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you believe. In my life, I have done all I can do to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence, is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and the peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide.
Thank you so much for that. Cindy Teed.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the freedom rides in the United States had a global impact, inspiring others around the world to challenge injustices. In 1965, inspired by the civil rights movement in the United States, a group of students from the University of Sydney organised a 15-day bus journey through regional New South Wales to protest the discrimination of Indigenous people. They were led by Charles Perkins, a Kalkadoon man and one of only 2 Indigenous students at the university. The Freedom Ride was a turning point in the Indigenous rights movement and helped move public opinion in the 1967 referendum to finally include Indigenous people in Australia's official population count. Today, I'll be reading a poem by Oodgeroo Noonuccal, an Indigenous activist, protest writer, and the first Black Australian to publish a book of verse. The piece is called The Aboriginal Charter of Rights, and in it she juxtaposes Indigenous realities alongside social and political themes. Noonuccal also shares Dr. King's vision of equality, fighting through verse for Indigenous rights. We want hope, not racialism, brotherhood, not ostracism, Black advance, not white ascendance, make us equals, not dependents. We need help, not exploitation. We want freedom, not frustration. Not control, but self-reliance. Independence, not compliance. Not rebuff, but education. Self-respect, not resignation. Free us from a mean subjection, from a bureaucrat protection. Let's forget the old-time slavers. Give us fellowship, not favours. Encouragement, not prohibitions. Homes, not settlements or missions. We need love, not overlordship. Grip of hand, not whip-hand lordship. Opportunity that places white and black on equal basis. You dishearten, not defend us. Circumscribe, who should befriend us. Give us welcome, not aversion. Give us choice, not cold coercion. Status, not discrimination. Human rights, not segregation. You the law, like Roman Pontius. Make us proud, not colour conscious. Give the deal you still deny us. Give goodwill, not bigot bias. Give ambition, not prevention. Confidence, not condescension. Give incentive, not restriction. Give us Christ, not crucifixion. Though baptized and blessed and Bibled, we are still tabooed and libelled. You devout salvation sellers, make us neighbours, not fringe dwellers. Make us mates, not poor relations. Citizens, not serfs on stations. Must we native old Australians in our own land rank as aliens? Banish band and conquer caste, then we'll win our own at last. Thank you.
That was nice. Our next reader is Eric Hanna.
I've been invited here today to read a poem entitled Rise Up, written by Royce Mann. Royce wrote this poem when he was 15 years old and has recited it in front of various groups, including the Martin Luther King family. Royce wrote this poem to remind us that the movement for equality isn't over, and we must remember to fight for equality each and every day. Let's rise up. Let's rise up with those overlooked and undervalued by society. The Black man who walks down the street on the way to his job, it's his first day as an 8th grade English teacher. The same Black man who has a son, his most prized possession, who told that son, life will be hard, but anything is possible. The Black man who walks down the street on the way to his job, only to pass a woman clutching her purse a little too tightly. Let's rise with the boy who was a girl and then didn't know that he was and now is a boy. The boy with the parents who loved their daughter but disowned their son. Let's rise up with the Muslim woman who works for the Justice Department, only to experience injustice every time she wears a hijab. Let's rise up and lend a hand to the boy who can't, the boy who is in a wheelchair watching the other kids play basketball, the boy that becomes the only one in his class to win an Olympic gold medal. Let's rise up with the woman who was born in the US, whose parents are Dominican and whose son is all American. So why is she repeatedly told to go back to Mexico? Let's even rise up with the poor white boy, the one who told he's privileged but doesn't feel that way. And yes, this boy does exist. The boy who talks about the pool his family doesn't have and wears the shoes his mother can't afford. He was even given everything, right? So it must be his fault, right? Wrong. Because as one YouTube commenter said, life can be hard if you're white, but life will never be hard because you're white. Let's rise up with the young Native American poet. She speaks wisdom, but no one listens. The poet who should be on stage right now, but instead has to hear a white boy speak for her. Let's rise up. Because once we do, the glass ceiling will be in reach, and trust me, it is breakable. Once we do, we will be able to see over any wall, no matter who pays for it. Once we do, the sky will truly be the limit. Scratch that, there will be no limit. Martin dreamed when it was time to dream. Rosa sat when it was time to sit. And Barack ran when it was time to run. Now it is time to rise up together as one. Thank you, and happy MLK Week.
Thank you very much. Next will be Jason Fitzpatrick.
Hello, my name is Jason Fitzpatrick, and I want to talk about two quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as they relate to an ideal which we may strive towards, both for educators and for students. King says, "Rarely do we find men who willingly engage in hard, solid thinking. There is an almost universal quest for easy answers and half-baked solutions. Nothing pains some people more than having to think." Often it is easy to believe that skills taught, such as critical thinking or an eagerness to engage with material, stop being useful outside of the classroom. But this could not be further from the truth. Actively engaging and critically interpreting the information we consume is essential to be a good friend, worker, employee, and citizen. Discernment is the cornerstone of a healthy mind. This is not the only contribution King has made to the subject of education. Although short, this next quote gets right to the point. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. Exploring this further, we see how Dr. King shows that both intelligence and character are necessary together to bring about education. Only knowledge enacted through virtue construct a history worth emulating.
Short and sweet. And now Karen Royster James.
Hello, my name is Karen Royster James. I'm the supervisor for tutoring and structured learning systems in the Academic Literacy Center at Ferris State University. Welcome to MLK Day. I am grateful and feel honored to be a part of such a great celebration at Ferris. I'm introducing Amanda Gorman and her poem, New Day's Lyric. Amanda Gorman, the wordsmith, the change maker. Amanda Gorman is the youngest inaugural poet in U.S. history, as well as an award-winning writer and cum laude graduate of Harvard University, where she studied sociology. She has written for the New York Times and has 3 books forthcoming with Penguin Random House. Born and raised in Los Angeles, she began writing at only a few years of age. Amanda's poem, New Day Lyric, is a 5-stanza 48-line resolution with themes of struggle and healing, known to admirers of the hill we climb, and of her best-selling collection, Call Us What We Carry, which came out in early December. You know, poets rarely enjoy the kind of attention Gorman received in 2021. But in an email to the Associated Press, she reflected less on her own success than on the state of the country. Gorman wrote that the chaos and instability of the past year had made her reject the idea of going back to normal and instead fight to move beyond it. She mentioned Maya Angelou's poem, Human Family, and added, to be a family, a country doesn't necessitate that we be the same or agree on everything. Only that we continue to try to see the best, say best, in each other and move forward into a shared future. Whether we like it or not, we are in this together. We are in this together. Gorman offered an alliterative response when asked what inspired New Day's lyric, telling the Associated Press that she wanted to write a lyric to honor the hardships, hurt, hope, and healing of 2021, while also hearkening the potential of 2022. This is such a unique New Year's Day because even as we toast our glasses to the future, we still have our heads bowed for what has been lost, she wrote. I think one of the most important things the new year reminds us is of what the old adage says. This too shall pass. You can't relive the same day twice, meaning every day is a new one, and every year an opportunity to step into the light. So I present to you New Day's lyric. Enjoy.
May this be the day we come together. Mourning we come to mend, withered we come to weather, torn we come to tend, battered we come to better. Tethered by this year of yearning, we are learning that though we weren't ready for this, we have been readied by it. We steadily vow that no matter how we are weighed down, we must always pave a way forward. This hope is our door, our portal, even if we never get back. Someday we can venture beyond it, to leave the known and take the first steps. So let us not return to what was normal, but reach toward what is next. What was cursed, we will cure. What was plagued, we will prove pure. Where we tend to argue, we will try to agree. Those fortunes we forswore, now the future we foresee. Where we weren't aware, we're now awake. Those moments we missed are now these moments we make, the moments we meet. And our hearts, once all together beaten, now all together beat. Come, look up with kindness yet, for even solace can be sourced from sorrow. We remember not just for the sake of yesterday, but to take on tomorrow. We heed this old spirit in a new day's lyric in our hearts. We hear it for Auld Lang Syne, my dear, for Auld Lang Syne. Be bold, sang time this year. Be bold, sang time, for when you honor yesterday, tomorrow ye will find. Know what we fought need not be forgot, nor for none. It defines us, binds us as one. Come over, join this day just begun. For wherever we come together, we will forever overcome.
Karen, thank you for introducing that to the group. And it's at this time that we give out the annual award. John Thorpe, I think I see him on here. In 1990, he and I and Mayor Mernick were in Colorado Springs, 1990, in Colorado Springs, and had to come up with some thoughts about how we as a university would move forward in terms of what we now call diversity, inclusion, and equity. Had a lot of ideas, creating a Senate diversity team and some things they would do, some curricular changes. But one of the more practical things was that each year we would give out an MLK Social Justice Award. And so this one says, Dr. Martin Luther King Social Justice Award. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Dr. Martin Luther King. Given to Karen Royster James. This award is presented to express our deep appreciation for your selfless, passionate advocacy for our students. January 17th, 2022. Expect diversity, Ferris State University. I think you guys just gave her a hand. If you could give her another hand, that would be really good. And then if, life is about change, and this year has been more change than usual, and we've had colleagues leave, some to go to work at other places. And one of those colleagues who left was Antoinette Epps, and she took with her an amazing recipe for fried catfish and macaroni and cheese. And you got Franklin, am I telling the truth?
You ain't lying.
I know, right? And she took that with her. Selfish, take that catfish with her. But she also took with her something which had become something of a tradition for us here at Ferris, which was that she would lead us in one of the old songs, one of the down home songs, if you would. And what I asked Franklin to do was to find the excerpt from last year. We'll beam her in next year or just fly her in or wherever. But he's going to play the excerpt from last year's program where she led us in a song. I hope that's okay with everybody. And if you'd like to take your voice off of mute and join in, that would be good. Because one of the things I've learned, and by the way, Michelle Rasmussen, you're something. I love you singing. I don't expect you to walk around without singing anymore. I mean, I love your voice. But one of the things I've noticed is that if you have 100 people and they're not especially good singers, but if they all sing, it sounds amazing. So I don't know how many of you want to join in, but those of you that feel comfortable, take your voices off mute and join in. So go ahead, Frank.
I'm going to sing a song called Precious Lord. This song was written in August 1932 by Thomas Dorsey. Precious Lord was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s favorite hymn. Dr. King gave his I've Been to the Mountaintop speech on April 3rd, 1968. The next evening, he was assassinated on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. He had just asked his colleagues to make sure that Precious Lord would be sung at the rally that was planned for that evening. This is my tribute to Dr. King. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired. I am weak.
Come on.
I am worn through the storm, through the night. Lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near. When my life is almost gone, hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand, lest I fall. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When the darkness appears and the night draws near, when the day is past and gone, at the river I stand, guide my feet, hold my hand, take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Antoinette thought she got away from us, and she couldn't get away from us. Well, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank especially Franklin, who was able to pull some readings together. Thank you to each of the readers who did a good job. Love to see people stepping out of their comfort zone and doing it. And you know, we've been through a lot. The nation, the state, but Ferris. I mean, we've been through a lot as a university. And I hope that programs like this and days like this can turn us toward each other, where we can listen to one another and reach out to one another. The differences between us can't be as great as the ones that Dr. King dealt with. Is that right? Yeah, I know that's right. And I'm really hoping that that we can find each other, that we can lean into each other, and that we can do it more in this year to come. So thanks to all of you for joining us, and have a good rest of your day, and enjoy the rest of the events that have been organized and will be facilitated by the Office of Multicultural Student Services. Have a good day.